Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's NSA Connect session. From NSP to NSA, the premier stuttering organization, which is going to be moderated and facilitated by four giants in the stuttering community. So I'm very much looking forward to tonight's session. I just want to go over quickly the ground rules for our session tonight. Please, as always, if you're not speaking, keep your microphones on mute. That helps us a lot with the background noise. If you will be speaking, if you have a question or you do want to speak at some point, you can do that one of two ways. You can raise your hand verbally, or you can use the icon down on the bottom. If you look down on the bottom tray and you look at the react button, you can click that and there's a raise hand feature. And then our moderators will see that. And then there's also a way right there where you can lower the hand as well. We are going to be recording tonight's session so that for folks that were unable to make it, this will be available for them in the future. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and let our moderator and facilitators go ahead and introduce themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to Doug. Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, Pam, thank you very, very much. Guys, I'm excited. This session is about one of my favorite topics, and that's talking about the history of the NSA. First, I would like to acknowledge that this NSA Connect session is brought to you by the NSA's Older Adults Who Stutter Committee, or as I like to call us, Seasoned Voices. So that is these are the folks that are bringing this particular NSA Connect session to us. We have some great panelists. So without ado, we are starting a little bit late. I'll go ahead and get started. Most of you do know me, but I am Douglas Scott. I'm from Houston, Texas, and I have been a part of this great organization for about 40 years. I am pleased to be moderating this great panel. And I'm just so excited of the guests. We are going to take a little journey. We're going to take a journey through the history of the National Stuttering Association. What started as a small project, the National Stuttering Project, grew from the co-founder Michael Sugarman's very simple idea of trying to connect people who stutter. So we are going to hear firsthand from the founder, co-founder of the National Stuttering Association, as he talks about the beginning days of the organization, and then he will go into and he'll share some of his vision and his passion concerning peer-led support and global stuttering awareness. Followed, Michael will be Paul Young, a past chair of the organization, who led our organization, who led the board during extreme, challenging times and pivotal moments. He will reflect on the challenges and the milestones of this growing organization. And then after that will be Marybeth, an awesome person who has served our organization for years and years at various levels, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that, but she will focus on the chapter, on the grassroots support that she spent years and years building in her chapter in her area, and then helping the national organization build chapters. So with that said, we will start with Michael to introduce himself briefly, and then he'll give us a presentation on all of the things that he had to go through to start our organization. And Michael?
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Hi, this is exciting time. So in 1976, I was going to a speech clinic at UC Santa Barbara. And during the time when I was going into stuttering therapy, the person, Janice Costello, who was the clinic coordinator, thought it'd be really good for me to start to meet with clients who came in to the stuttering clinic on a one-to-one and as a group. So in 1976, I started our kind of like a ad hoc Santa Barbara group, and it was associated with the clinic at that time. Now, one really fascinating thing happened was a person who stutters shared that he had to go to court. And while he was in court and he was testifying, uh, the judge told him not to come in drunk. He shared that with the group. I go, wait a second here. This is not right. So not only did I get the speech, clinicians and the student speech clinicians and people who stutter. So I mean, the people who stutter group was maybe about 12, but there was about 40 people that showed up at the Santa Barbara courthouse, and we chanted, "We stutter." That's all. We're not drunk. And the judge actually came out and went to the guy and apologized. And he actually came to the group that we met. And this gentleman, he just cried. He was like 48, 50 years old. Of course, I'm 23. I'm going, this is really cool. This is really cool. So at the end of 1976, I decided to become a University of California student intern. And there was an opening at the state capitol that was in Sacramento. And then there, I was thinking more of a California Stuttering Association. And I'm there, and I ran into this legislative assistant who said, "Oh, have you heard about this guy, Bob Goldman? He contacted us, and he wanted to do a national group." And I said, "Heck yeah, I'm 23 years old. I'm graduating, sure, this sounds fun." So I contacted Bob. Bob and we met at the end of 76 in Sacramento. And in January of 77, we became a nonprofit status. Now, during that time, in the early part of the years, that I was a graduating student, a senior in sociology, and I started to write grants. And lo and behold, also Malcolm Fraser actually gave us some money, shocking enough. But also we got grants from people, starting grants and everything like that. So by the time that I graduated, I moved in with Bob, and Bob's wife, Honore, was pregnant. I'm going like, oh God, like I better get my own place here. There's not enough room to sleep on the couch. So we were starting to get grants. We were starting to get known in the field of stuttering as this kind of like, what should I say? Kind of like a radical group, which I'm proud to say, I guess, at that time. So we also aligned ourselves with this independent living movement that was actually happening in Berkeley, California. So where we got a lot of, these thoughts of you're not alone, it's okay to stutter, and it's okay to reduce your stuttering, and the person first language. Bob left because the finances wasn't that high. Basically he left, and he started to working, and then I ran the organization. Now there's two things that are going on at this time. Was not only were we getting some grants in, but we were starting our groups. And what I was thinking was twice a month, our groups, and coordinate it through the main office. And that was, to suggest ideas that was coming out of, you have to recognize too, the late 70s, there was a lot of stigma talking from Eric Goffman. So we were talking about, okay, I stutter. Do I have stigma, and what's the stigma about it, and blah 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 blah. Also about trying to get legislation passed, which we were very influential about the idea, that is the Individual Disability Education Act, which is out of what is called the Public Law 94/142, and that was to assure that children would receive stuttering services in the schools. So by this time, I guess our name was getting out there. And on the East Coast of, so I'm from, California. So on the East Coast, there was a group called the National Council for Adult Stutterers. And it was led by Gene Wally and Michael Hartford. So in 1978, and this was our explosion onto the scene. So in 1978, ASHA had their conference in San Francisco. Well, heck, I'm living in Oakland, across the bay. John Albeck was living in San Francisco. And I started to get to know a couple of the administrators. So they put us on a panel. And our panel was with the Adult Council for Adult Stutterers. But prior to that, there was a big speaking engagement by William Perkins, Joseph Sheehan, Hugo Gregory, and Gene Cooper. And that they were using the term stutterer a lot. So heck, right? I mean, I'm 23, 24. So I rose my hand, and the three of us who were standing in stage and said, heck, can we start reframing from the word stutterer and using person first language and follow Carl Rogers' idea of person first? So lo and behold, that was like boo, 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 boo. It's like, but by doing that, it got our name out there. God, like, hey, what is going on here? So then when I was a part of the panel, now you have to remember too, Gene Wally was a speech therapist and Michael Hartford was a consumer. And they were running groups on the East Coast out of the clinic. And we were running our groups like how we run our groups, not in the clinic per se. So at our panel, it was like 1978. And at the panel, there was like 250, I mean, we were standing room only. I think we made this impression because John and I went to every stuttering session and put a brochure on every chair there was, and with a piece of paper saying to come to the session. As well as because I was starting to get to know the California Association, they gave us a booth for free. But the booth was right next to the restroom. So lo and behold, it turned out to be even better than what we expected. So we had all these brochures, we're just handing them out, handing them out, handing them out. And then came the panel, and that's where, I said, and that's based on Eric Burns' work, who was a psychologist out of San Francisco, was it's okay to stutter and it's okay to reduce your stuttering. As well as, you're not alone, which was a key thing within the whole community of the mental health community at the time and the disability rights community. So so then we kind of like, I mean, I'm going to use the term merge, but I think we took over the National Council for Adult Stuttering. I mean, it's not nice to say we took them over, but we basically merged with them, and Gene Wally was actually a really key supporter to this movement because he also believed in the support group and the idea of peer counseling. Though the disability movement was a whole about peers taking hold. So within the next, I guess, from 79 to 81 to 82, um, I got into my little VW, you know, station wagon and got traveling all over the country actually. And it was great because from the foundation at ASHA, we're going like, what is going on with this group? I mean, Van Riper was a little, like what was going on? Who is these groups talking about self-help in the stuttering movement and how we could coordinate this with stuttering therapy and da 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 da. So by 81, 82, I was fortunate now to back up a little bit to give you some history. So I was in a doctoral program in sociology. And what I was doing was, about stigma because Eric Goffman was at Cal. And, we would go to his classes and go, well, what about stuttering? And he would go, huh, that's a good framework. I didn't look at communication disabilities at the time. So we're talking about late 70s. So I was in a program in sociology, and I wanted to do disability studies. So mind you, this is late 70s. And my advisor's going, wait a second, disability studies? Like, eh. However, there was a beginning of a stages out in Boston that also had a disability self-help movement. So I was coordinating with the Boston self-help movement for our movement. So not only are we cross-span and cross-interdisciplinary, but what we saw was therapy itself. So my advisor said, well, it sounds like to me that you should be a social worker. I said, oh, okay, well, okay. So you don't want me to get my PhD in sociology with a specialty in stuttering and disability. And they go, oh, that's, I've never heard of that. So, so I said, okay, well, I'll become a social worker. So, and in becoming a social worker, I totally lucked out in a lot of ways. Like I got a chance to work at Stanford Medical Center, and the person that was there was David Burns, and he helped to create cognitive behavior therapy. And so I was fortunate, and being a person who stutters and seeing clients and have to report to David Burns about who I'm talking to and what kind of therapeutic techniques that I was doing and what skills. I'm talking to, somebody that helped to create with Beck cognitive behavior therapy. So I was freaked out all the time. And I might have stuttered. I might have, but they didn't seem to care because they were focused on what we were doing with our clients. So fortunately, because of the background that I had within the stuttering community, which is thank you very much, because you don't know what you've led to, because the peer movement in the mental health community is explosion. It's gone bonkers. It's worldwide. And what had happened was that we started to train our peers to work with the mental health professionals in the clinic room, which is a very similar idea that Gene Wally had. And also Hugo Gregory was thinking about how can we use your group as consultants? Now, by 82, we're talking about years ago, right? Van Riper then all of a sudden said, huh, you're not taking our clients. You're actually here to be a positive effect, which we were, so Van Riper was very supportive of our group, the National Association. And then in the worldwide perspective, this peer movement just exploded. And so if you follow me on Facebook, sometimes I'll remark that throughout the country, in every state in the United States now has a peer counseling program for peer support in the mental health community that you have to be certified in order to work with us as mental health professionals. So I left. John then all that became, the director, and that's when he thought, now back up a second. So we were doing in the late 70s, we had a parent group, we had parent workshops. We didn't really do kids workshops at that time, okay? We really didn't. And we did workshops. John Harrison did his workshops. I did my workshops. I went, around the country to do workshops. I'm sure, the concept of it's okay to stutter and it's okay to reduce your stuttering was kind of like, whoa, that was like, I don't know what that was about. But the effect about what we did as a community is earth shattering. It's so fantastic that we could see. So in which I guess I leave it up to Paul. So in the 90s, there was this transition period. And so I was a part of that. They asked me to become the ED for 2 years. And in those years that we did the Year of the Child Who Stutters, so we had 14 workshops throughout the country. So we're talking about 96. So we started to emerge ourselves into the whole thing about helping children who stutter as well. And we had all the, professionals there too,
Right, right.
as well as that I started to do training
Mm,
for our peer groups.
okay.
So that was it. In 97, I, went the international route. So I
Right,
started,
right, right.
so I helped to create, the International Stuttering Awareness Day and worked with the ISA. But I have to tell you, my love and my heart and soul and everything I've learned is from you guys. It's not a
Um,
one thing. Whenever I talk to Pam or Annie or Doug or, just everybody on this screen, it kind of like refreshes me to realize where we are in this whole movement. So I want to say thank you.
well, that is awesome, Michael. And again, thank you.
Well,
We will come back to you when we start to get further down the line, because as we go from being an organization that primarily focus on that's who stutter, then we sort of change that. So we're going to go into Paul here shortly. Before Paul, you start here, guys, we will have a period of time after all three of the presentations for questions and answers. And then we will have some more time to delve in a little bit deeper into some of the things like it's okay to stutter, when do we, in the importance of going from being a stutterer to a person who stutters, and then the really thing that set our organization apart from some of the others in those days were the local chapters, a large uh, network of local chapters. So with that said, Paul.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Thank you for the invitation. And Michael, thank you for that history. Much of that I had not heard. So I'm glad that we're recording this and hopefully one day, if you haven't already, I know you've written some of it down, but hope you get the rest of it. Anyway, so as Doug said, I'm Paul Young. I'm calling in from Chantilly, Virginia, which is outside the Washington, D.C., or it's part of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I guess I'm a latecomer. I joined what was then the National Stuttering Project in 1987. So 10 years after Michael. I had just graduated from college and moved from Ohio to Colorado. I joined. There was a workshop going on about a month after I joined. So I showed up scared to death in the parking lot. I remember sitting in my car saying, "What are you getting into?" And so I kind of sheepishly walked in, and they had a registration table, and I said, "I'm Paul Young," and whoever was at the table said, "Oh, John wants to meet you," and I was like, "John, I had been in Colorado a month. I knew maybe a handful of folks at work." Well, it was John Albeck who had come out from San Francisco to the conference. So and ended up not being in Colorado for very long. And a year later, I relocated to the Washington D.C. area, started to attend the local chapters. We actually met at the National Institute of Health, which was pretty impressive. But they sponsored our group to use their facility. We started to do annual workshops. I started to help with those, and then one day I was going on a business trip, and I'm walking through the airport, and out of the corner of my eye, I'm like, "That looks like John Glenn." And I decided to turn around and go back and see if it was, and it was not only John but also Annie Glenn. And so by this time I'm heading away from my gate, so I had to turn around yet one more time. And I thought, you just got to stop, and my dilemma was, who do you talk to, America's hero or your personal hero, right? So, and if you've met them or interact with them, they are both, or were both, they've since passed, extremely gracious, personable folks. And so, and that led to, I invited Annie to our next workshop, and we'd have 25 to 30 at our workshops, and we had 135 at the one that Annie Glenn was at. So, and then she ended up coming to the Cleveland conference and keynoted in 1994. So, so I got interested in organizational stuff. I think Annie Glenn propelled me to the board, quite frankly. So, and then I was board chair, as Michael mentioned, from 1994 to 1997. Seems like eons ago. Also, we hosted, I led the planning for the 93 convention that was outside of Washington, D.C. So yeah, as Michael said, that it was a pretty dramatic transition when John left as executive director. It was not an amicable departure, let me just put it that way, and caused quite a big disturbance in the organization. But we had good folks on the board. There's a couple of them on this chat here. We had brought on Annie at the time as the associate director, and as Michael said, the board brought him back on for 2 years. And I think one of the successes, or one of the reasons, well, we were able to get through it for a lot of reasons. One is the tremendous support from the membership. We did lose some folks. Some folks got angry with us and left, but a lot of really good folks, continued on. Michael and Annie led the organization. And then at one board meeting in 1995, in the middle of this, it was Ira Zimmerman, if those of you remember Ira. And Ira is pretty well known for being a strong advocate for positive portrayals in the media. And every once in a while, Ira would have an idea that the board didn't go along with. So he speaks up at a board meeting. He says, why don't we dedicate next year to the year of the child who stutters? And as Michael mentioned, the board was like, "That's a great idea, Ira." And I think Ira was more shocked than anyone else that we actually thought it was a great idea.
and it was a huge springboard for us. You know, the team did an excellent job. Michael mentioned the 14th symposia, partnering with speech language pathologists, bringing in more parents, more kids who stutter. Because we had dabbled a bit, and that's probably not the best word for the efforts that were going on, but it hadn't been as big of a focus. Let me put it that way. And then I got married and had a couple of kids and got busy with my career and kind of like skipped out of the NSA for a couple of years. And my kids are now grown and graduating college, and so I came back to a workshop that we had locally, and the Denver convention. I'll speak more about that if I'm given a chance. It was just it's just made tremendous strides in the time that I was kind of missing in action. I'm just very proud of the organization and the leadership and how far we've come. Let me stop there.
Paul, yeah, excellent, excellent. So again, thank you so much. But you are correct. The organization has made great progress. We've done a lot of tremendous things. But yeah, we will come back to you a little bit later, okay, Paul? So with that said, Marybeth. Okay. Oh, are you
Yeah,
muted,
okay.
Marybeth?
All right. I have to find the little microphone to
Absolutely.
unplug. So
Well,
I'm
thank you,
on.
Marybeth.
Yeah. So thank you, Doug and Paul and Michael. I am in awe following Paul and Michael. You know, I guess it's my job to talk about the challenges and the beginnings of starting a chapter. I'm 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 talking to you from Orland, Maine, which is a very small town, about 30 miles from Bar Harbor, right next to the Blue Hill Peninsula. Anybody who knows Maine. Uh, and so one of the challenges for me and our chapter is the fact that we are a very rural state. The biggest city is Portland, which is 2.5 hours from me. And our big city of Portland is probably only, 300,000 people. The whole state has probably 1 million people. But so I'll talk about that problem later. But initially, I actually first heard about the NSP, National Stuttering Project, when I was in grad school. I'm a retired SLP. I went back to school for my second career when I was 40 years old. And at that point, I stuttered fairly well, but I was taking on all my challenges. I had 4 kids. I had to go ahead with my life. But I stuttered very well. But I went back to school, and there was a wonderful professor. His name was Bill Dalpity, and he was the fluency professor at University of Maine. And he picked me out of the crowd right away as a person who stutters. And he sort of took me under his wing, and he actually had by himself formed an adult sort of self-help support group. He had done his training in Western Michigan under Van Riper, and so was very into supporting the person who stutters. Stuttering is okay, just I always felt very accepted and as who I was, and not as somebody who had to change the way I talked in order to be okay, Anyway, he talked about this, even though we had this little local Maine group, we had maybe 4 or 5 people that would gather every so often in his office at the university. And it was social, it wasn't therapy, it was just support. He said, you know, there's this organization way out in California, you know, and it's led by this guy named John Albeck, I think. And I said, oh, I just said, oh, that sounds interesting, but I sort of wasn't interested because I still hadn't quite accepted that I stuttered, and I was pretty covert. I thought I was hiding it, but I obviously wasn't. But all of a sudden, I started getting these postcards from John Albeck. Anybody here? I'm sure a lot of people on this Zoom have gotten postcards. And I got them, I liked them, but I hid them, you know, from my family. I didn't want my kids to see them, didn't want my husband to see them. So that kind of like, that's where I was personally in my journey. Long story short, I graduated from grad school, worked in a school, and went to I got interested in becoming a fluency therapist. I wanted to know more about therapy. Stuttering. I took extra continuing ed courses, and I got accepted to the 2-week specialist course sponsored by Stuttering Foundation in Iowa. And at that 2-week course, I met Hugo Gregory, Scott Yaris, Nina Reardon, Kristen Camilla. I was just, and Carolyn Gregory. I was just blown over by these amazing people. And I obviously learned a lot more about the NSP, which maybe by then was the NSA. That was in 1996. Okay, 1996. And I understand now that was sort of that trauma transition period, which I was under the radar of all that at that point. But later on, I heard about all this transition going on, but I really wasn't much into it. Back then, it was kind of like all about me, you know. But I came home from that 2-week experience as an SLP, as a person who stuttered, more energized, more willing to just take it on. And I decided I was going to go to the next NSA conference that I could, because I didn't know until then that there were actually annual conferences to go to. So I went to the next conference in 1998 in Atlanta, and totally blown away, totally changed, empowered. And I came home from Atlanta saying, okay, we have to start a chapter in Maine, you know. And that's where I got my energy and my passion from. But still being me, and not the person I am now, but back then still, you know, not quite as, I don't know, strong, maybe aggressive as I am now. Like right now, it's like, I don't hold me back, you know, but back then I was a little more cautious. And I wanted to start a chapter. I didn't have a clue how, but I didn't want to, I didn't want to do it by myself, because I didn't think I could do it by myself. And I got the new fluency professor at the university was then Nancy Hall. And she had become a buddy of mine because she had been inviting me to her course to talk about fluency stuttering therapy for kids. Because by that time, I was having a little private practice, and I was seeing kids that stutter. And I was becoming my own little stuttering specialist. And because we live in a small community, I was really, as a SLP, was becoming more well known as for somebody who was willing to work with kids that stuttered, you know, because SLPs were sort of maybe afraid back then. They didn't want to do any harm. And I was like, okay, bring them on, send me your referrals. So I was fine with kids that stuttered. I hadn't yet met that many adults that stuttered, but
Right, right.
Nancy agreed to help me, and we Bill Dolpatty had retired, but we contacted him, and he was all gung ho for us, and he helped us by giving us his original list of people that came to his group. So I think that was one of the biggest helps that we had, is that we started out with at least a core name of maybe 10 people. That's all it was. But of course, I had to call them.
Yeah. So did you have to make a lot of phone calls then in those
I
days?
had
Because
to.
I don't think the internet was
I
around,
had.
right?
I had to make a lot of phone calls, and so you just take on the risk and you go for it. The good news is you knew you were calling somebody else that stuttered, So anyway, so so there are a lot of challenges when you first start a chapter. Number one, obviously, is where are you going to get all the people that started to come to your chapter? How are you going to publicize it? We were lucky. We started out with this core group, but we knew we also needed to advertise around. So there's we had a nice newspaper in Bangor, Maine, the Bangor Daily News, and there was a health editor, back when they had real newspapers and editors that specialize. And again, I had to contact her, but and I'm not sure how that phone call went, but I convinced her that she should write an article about this new chapter that was starting. And she I remember she wanted to know if she could come to one of our meetings. I said, no, you can't come to a meeting. I remember that anyway, but she was fine with that. But she wrote a nice article about our chapter starting up, and I made flyers, all by myself. I probably wrote them up by hand, or we did have computers back then. I probably made a big font, computer page, and I walked around to the grocery stores. But again, we're a rural area, so I probably drove. I know I went to Newport, I went to Bar Harbor, you know, I went to Old Town, so I probably drove. I probably drove an hour radius actually, one day, and just posted flyers up on drugstore bulletin boards, library bulletin boards, and I um I I wrote myself a note. I remember sending out postcards. I don't know how I got the names and addresses for these postcards, but I remember printing out, the message, the announcement for the meeting, and cutting them out and gluing them on the postcard and sending the postcards. So, that was basically back then the way we advertised. The other way we advertise is that I also figured that we needed a sponsor to kind of make us legitimate. And if we had a sponsor, we could find a place to meet. And I was thinking, we had a private speech clinic in Bangor, and we had the Eastern Maine Medical Center, had a speech language pathology department, which I actually did one of my practicums as a student at Eastern Maine Medical Center. So I contacted the head of the speech therapy department there and asked her if she would sponsor our chapter, and as a sponsor, give us a place to meet. And she was glad to. She said, sure, she thought it was a great idea. because I actually knew her. She was my supervisor when I was doing my practicum there. So, it helps to have networks, to know people that you know. And however, what I was expecting was a nice room in the medical center someplace to give us sort of like meeting at the NIH, Paul, except for Northern Maine, the Eastern Maine Medical Center was like the big place to meet. But you know what? She gave us instead a social room in one of the nursing homes that the medical center owns. It was still in Bangor, but I was a little bit deflated when she said, "Oh, you can meet in this social room in the local nursing home." But we did meet there, and it was a nice room with couches, etc. But it wasn't it wasn't the most what I want to say, professional name to say that where you're going to meet. So
I hear you.
yeah, so those were some of the challenges we had in terms of just getting the word out. But
Absolutely.
I think we started out with 4 or 5 people that would come. Sometimes, we would show up and it was just me or Nancy. Sometimes we eventually did move out of the nursing home. One of our members, we moved out of the nursing home after like 4 or 5 years. I think we met there that long. And then
Right.
one of the members we attracted lived in Belfast. That's like 45 minutes from Bangor. And he said, I think I'm going to have to tell my he went to an Episcopal church, and he figured out that his priest stutters. And he says, I've never talked to him about that, but I think I'm going to have to, now that he's been coming to our group. He thought he would talk to his priest, and so that worked out well. And so then he invited us to meet in the church. So then we moved from meeting in Bangor to Belfast, which was 45 minutes away.
That's a
It
long
was
drive.
closer. So the
Right.
other challenge is that we are so spread out as a state. We were meeting in person. We moved we were in the church maybe 2 years, and then he had to move. He moved to another. The priest moved,
Right.
and so we decided we wanted to meet in a restaurant, because then I had heard, this is probably in like the mid 80s. By then we had heard that some groups were meeting in a restaurant. Though that sounds fun. So we started meeting in a local truck stop, just outside of Bangor. And everybody enjoyed that. We had a table in the corner and we ate dinner. And I think it helped people come. But still, we had 2 people who lived on Mount Desert Island near Bar Harbor. They were driving an hour and a half to come to our meeting. We
Wow.
had members who lived down in Waterville, and that's an hour from Bangor. We Hannah Lade and George Lade, I'm sure you all know them. She used to
Right.
live. Well, she moved away. When they moved back to Maine, they lived like 2.5 hours from me. And
Awesome. So, sorry. So, did Maine have a chance to host a NSA conference?
so we, the talking of the year of the child that stutters, it rings a bell. Because one year, early on, we had a conference, and it was soon after we started our chapter, because I know Bill Dawparty was involved, and I almost forgot to say, the other way that we got the word out was through the speech language pathologist.
Right, right. Yeah.
because I was a member of the Maine Speech and Language Hearing Association, and even back then we had a network, a communication network, and I was able to spread the word that way and through the schools. I worked through the schools and through the university.
Right, right.
We could spread the word. And I contacted a local speech therapy clinic. So we eventually got to be known that there is a chapter of this National Stuttering Association. And so
Excellent.
we held we've held a total of 3 one-day conferences, 2 in Maine, and we held one that we sponsored as our chapter, but we held it down in Portland because we thought it might attract more people if we were down in Portland. So we've had 3 one-day
Okay, okay.
conferences.
Well, thank you, Marybeth.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Guys, with that said, we are going to open it up for any questions that you have. There's some other topic areas that we can delve into deeply as well. Any questions before we proceed on?
Jim has a question.
Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, just more history. I was a chapter leader in Chicago starting in the mid-'80s. I served on the board from 1997 to 2003, and then from 2008 to 2012. And what was a fascinating process was keeping the organization from going bankrupt and gradually putting it on a sound footing. And Paul Young had a lot to do with that. Somebody that I wish we had here was Lee Reeves, who followed Paul as the chair. We started in the late 90s. We started attracting more people to the national conference. I think our first big conference was in Buffalo in 1997. And I forget how many people we had. It was several hundred, but it was our largest conference to date, partly because a bunch of people came down from Canada. At that time, for a number of years, the national conference brought in most of the revenue. So if we had a conference that wasn't successful, we came close to going broke. That happened a couple of times. And
very challenging times in those days.
Yeah,
definitely very challenging times.
One person who made a difference was Barry Lieben, who joined us when he brought his son to the conference in Atlanta in '98. And he was a very successful businessman. He served on the board, and he was a terrific board member because he was a self-made businessman that didn't sugarcoat things. And he bailed us out in 2003, and that's how we moved the office to New York City, because he gave us office space in his company's offices.
Right. Jim,
Yeah.
one of the things, since you have been around a long time as well, one of the things, and I think you mentioned this before, is that in the early days and stuff during those times, it was very, very a big issue to start to claim this thing called stuttering, to start to say it's okay to stutter,
Yes.
things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
That was huge. I participated in, I think it was the National Conference on Stuttering, and at their sessions, we were talking about how can we improve our fluency. And the notion that it's okay to stutter was radical for its day, but that has made a great deal of difference. I mean, what blew my mind when I started going to the conferences was actually hearing people stutter in public speaking. And that was huge. Something else that helped us thrive is the network of chapters made us a national group.
Absolutely. That
And,
was huge.
it started in California. When the Chicago chapter started, there were a couple of people in Texas who were working with chapters, and shortly after my chapter started, I got a call from Joseph Diaz in Texas, and he told me I should send in a form each time I had a meeting. And I probably told him to go jump in the lake, but
I'm sure you did, Jim.
from the first, we had a national network of chapters, and
Wonderful, wonderful.
that has helped us um, stay viable and also grow a fantastic talent pool.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much, Jim. Yeah, again, the thing that really has made us special is our large network of chapters. I want to go to someone else who played a major role in sort of the development and growth of the
Vicky's got
organization
her
in that
hand
time.
raised.
After Vicky, then I'll go to Annie after that, Annie Bradbury. Vicky, go ahead, please. Thank you. Vicky, go ahead. You probably are on a mute, Vicky, so
I'm
you'll have to, there you go. Good job.
uh, 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 I just I have a question from Michael. M m m m Michael, do you know how Bob Goldman is doing these days?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay.
That was my question.
Okay, Vicky, thank you. Annie, any thoughts, comments? And
Wow. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
My name is Annie Bradbury, and I had the joy of being director from 19 Tammy, when was I? I have it somewhere. 1993 to 2003, during this whole transition. And hearing all of this, how do we sum this up? Thank you, Tammy. I grew up with this organization. Michael and we've laughed because I've seen him more out of the country at conferences, more than in the country. And it's always, I think, look back at my life, and I grew up with the organization, and I'm grateful to you, Michael and John, all back. And I found the organization when I was 19 years old, and I'm 67. So I literally grew up with the organization. And back then we didn't have the internet, so I had to pick up the phone, and I wouldn't. So it took me about a year and a half to reach out to the organization, and it's changed my life ever since. And when I look at this group of people, there's so many of us who've been here for many, many years. Doug and I were at the first conference back in Dark 100. And I really think what carries us forward today is the same thing that was back then that you've heard is, it's all the people who are committed. You know, for me, why am I still involved? It's what I can do for what we can do for the next generation. So I think all these stories, if anything, can propel us that what we can do as a group of people. I started the first chapter, I don't know if you remember this, Michael, out of San Francisco in Fullerton, California, back in the day. And when we did the Year of the Child for 17 years, I went to Washington State and we did it there after you and I presented at ASHA. And I remember the first youth group that we pulled at a conference, we didn't expect it, but so many people brought their children who happened to stutter. And it evolved and has grown to what it is today, which is amazing. So I think our history is so important. Erin, so I haven't seen you in 25,000 years. It's great to see your face. But I think, you know, our takeaway is, you know, these people. I want to say to our executive director, Tammy Flores, you know, our convention was and has been our largest fundraiser, but today she's our largest fundraiser with the relationships that she cultivates and does behind the scenes. And so I really appreciate you, Tammy. And when it moved to New York, you know, I couldn't go. I was married in here in California and said, you go girl in a New York minute. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to the organization. And now we have Pam and we have Tanya. So I think for those of you that are new, you are our future. And that's really all I'm going to say. It's just that it changed my life. I don't know where I'd be without it. And it can be the same for every one of you, no matter when you get involved. I was 19, you could be 65. You know, it's really important that we remember that what we do is for the next. It's for the next. It's not always a child, right? It could be, you know, an adult. So thank you for the opportunity to reach out and talk, Doug. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Excellent, excellent. Is there anyone else would like to ask these
I
guys that
would.
are on the panel between Michael and Paul? Please, Paula, go ahead.
Yeah, this question is for Michael Sugarman. Hello,
Okay.
Mike.
Hi.
My question is, how did you all come up with the word project as opposed to association or, you know, more of an organized term?
Well, to answer you, it was actually, that's Bob's term, was a project. My term was California Stuttering Association
Oh, okay.
because I was more interested, like what you just said. But
Right.
you know, I mean, I'm 23. Bob was 30. Okay, whatever. Let's just do it. You know.
Let's just do it. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just do it. And to add, there are a couple of legislative footnotes to this whole thing that's helped many people here in the United States and now worldwide. It was the American Disabilities Act Amendment Act that includes stuttering in 2008. And, you know, fortunately, like I was, you know, involved in the mental health community, but also stuttering was at my heart. So was able to talk to people and lawyers in Washington, and stuttering was added to that. So that is huge. So besides of course, our self-help groups, our support groups, we've also had a major impact on the whole community.
Thanks.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you. One of the things I wanted to ask Paul about this. Paul, do you recall when we sort of moved from it being an organization for uh, 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 adults into starting to bring in families, and then also how do we handle the addition of speech language pathologists?
Mm. Yeah, I'll try to answer that, or but others may need to chime in because I think Michael mentioned having a parent workshop, back in the 70s and 80s. So I want to say there was that feeling from the very beginning, and I think all of us who came in as adults uh, would say, "Gee, I wish we had found this when we were kids, right? Or when we were teens." So I think that my sense is that desire was always there. We just didn't put a huge organizational focus on it. Um, I remember when I was planning the 1993 conference, a mom called me a couple months or so beforehand, and she says, I have a teenage son who stutters. He's in, speech pathology. We heard about the convention. Do you have anything for teens? And well, not really a whole lot. And had some speech language pathologists who were beginning to to bring kids. So we had kind of the beginnings, but nothing terribly organized. Oh, Annie, you're going to have to help me. Gail.
Yeah, I can speak to that
Oh,
somewhat.
okay.
Okay, when my first convention was in Atlanta, 1998,
Okay.
and at that point there were kids running around.
Yeah.
And if you remember, at that point I was an SLP, and I was seeing kids that
Yeah.
stuttered, and I was like blown away. Look at all these kids. There's a conference. I didn't know until then that this was a possibility, for kids and families to have an annual conference.
Right.
Yeah.
So at that point, there was something going on with the kids and families, and Nina Reardon
Mhm.
was very much involved with that, and
Yeah.
and that's actually how I really got more involved in the NSA. As I came back conference after conference working with the kids, and
Wonderful.
I started working with Nina, and realizing, oh, we need to start family chapters. We really have to keep going. There was another gal I worked with, Debbie Nicolai, I think her name was.
Right. Yep.
Remember
Yep.
Debbie
Right.
Nicolai?
Yes.
She got involved because she came with her daughter, who was like an adolescent at that point, maybe the year before my first conference, and she jumped in to help organizing more activities for the kids and families. So it sort of took off from then, and at some point around there, I joined the board. I should know when I joined,
Okay.
but I
Right.
didn't. But that was the first time we had an official family programs chair, and Debbie Nicolai and I were the first family programs co-chair, and
Okay. Fantastic.
it was basic. We took over from Nina,
Right. Right.
done a lot of that grassworks organizing, and Kristen Camello was very involved at that point. So
Excellent.
those
Excellent.
those were the years when it got started. 19.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Marybeth.
Yeah.
Annie.
Actually, I mean, the first workshop was starting that SLPs had kids of their own who stuttered, so they
Okay.
started to come. Like we're talking in late 80s when
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
that
Excellent.
that actually was that groundswell of SLPs with their kids and then with their clients. They're going like, whoa. Now, you brought up a really good point, Doug, and to Paul and to Annie and every and Tammy, was so how did this transition happen? You'll have to remember a lot of adults that we had in the late 70s and early 80s were afraid to have kids there. Now, of whether or not it was PTSD or reminded them of themselves. But other
Right.
of us who were younger than they were said, whoa, this makes perfect sense. So it was a great transition, and where we are now, I mean, it's great. I mean, so it was in the late 80s when parents started to get involved. We did have parent workshops in the late 70s, actually. Gage Herman, who was a part of our board, was a SLP who did not stutter, but did workshops. Elaine Wells was married to
Elaine
Rich
Wilson.
Wells, so
Yeah.
she was an SLP. So they put on our parent workshop, which means kids would come and talk about that. So
Okay. Okay. Excellent. I think Erin had her hand up. Erin, iPad. Yes. You're on mute right now, Erin. So you need to unmute yourself there. I don't know if I can do it.
Okay,
Yeah.
can you
There
hear
we
me
go.
now?
Go ahead, Erin.
Okay,
Yes.
my name's Erin Dyer. I live in a small Swiss village in Wisconsin called New Glarus. And I first got involved, I'd say maybe the late 80s, probably the late 80s. And Judith Eckhart's a good friend of mine. I also enjoy Marybeth. I enjoy Hannah and George a lot. I've met people through other stuttering groups too. There is a group out of New Jersey that I had met. I'm retired now, and I'm 71, Annie, but I hate retirement. I became a therapist because my aunts and uncles were deaf, and I noticed that if I listened carefully, I could understand them. So that night, I changed my application for college from social work to speech pathology. Now, as I was growing up, my babysitter's brother stuttered, and that frightened me. And so as I got older, I got more interested. I've worked in the public schools for 42 years, and one of my personalities is to be a clown, and I have clowned at the NSA meetings with the children.
Okay.
So I've done things with kids. But the person most responsible for my getting so involved was a little boy whose mother was a teacher I worked with. And I worked with him from like age 4. And by 5th grade, he was fine. But he genetically, on both his mother's side and the father's side, there were people who stuttered. This young man has become a doctor here in Madison. And I saw him at his grandmother's funeral, and he came right over to me, picked me up, and gave me a hug. And you know what? Out of all the children that I have worked with, it's the children, well, they're adults now, and the parents who always come up to me and talk to me. But here's my question for you guys. Do you
Okay.
feel like you just automatically draw people to you who stutter? Because I just met a guy down the street, 4 houses away. He stutters. I asked him if he was ever involved, in a self-help movement. And he said, no, I didn't need to use that. And he seemed pretty easy stuttering, but
Right.
but do you see what I mean? Like I could just say, oh, I'm a speech therapist and my specialty is stuttering therapy. Oh, I used to stutter, or oh, my grandchild stutters. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I wish my son
Excellent.
understood.
Excellent,
Mom,
Erin.
quit
Thank you.
talking about stuttering.
Well, thank you, Erin. That's awesome. Anyone else have some questions and some thoughts as we get a little bit closer to the end? Jim, you have another brief do you have a question or a comment? Jim?
Yeah, oh yeah, just a couple of things I've noticed down through the years. Stuttering got a big visibility bump with the movie The King's Speech in 2012. I mean, we saw a sudden jump in attendance at our conference, and I mean that was a milestone. The second thing I've noticed in the last few years is social media is a huge factor. I mean, I'm active on Facebook because I'm old and have nothing better to do.
Yeah.
But there has been an explosion in the number of stuttering groups on Facebook, probably other social media as well. Something else that has changed is that people who stutter, I think, are more likely to advocate for themselves than they were decades ago. Back in like the 90s and early 2000s, members would contact us saying, hey, this television show has has something about stuttering that upsets me. You guys should do something. Well, now when that happens, people are standing up on their own.
Good.
That's a big change. And so I think our organization helped make that happen.
Great. Yep.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts before we start to wrap up? Okay, so while there's a pause, I think that there was one person in the chat. I think it came from David. He was asking about, will the NSA do a conference internationally? David, the NSA, as well as many other organizations around the world, are a part of a thing called the ISA, which is the International Stuttering Association. And that is the international forum where we gather for stuttering conferences. And those are called a World Congress, and that generally happens every 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeremiah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jeremiah. I'll be quick though, but I just want to say just thank you to this organization, and it has truly grown the friendship. And I was scrolling through on the Zoom call, and I see their voices, and I'm just like, 'cause I joined the NSA I believe it was like 2020, and I found it during just the COVID years, and it's been truly a blessing. Then I was chuckling wise because like you guys were saying that like you guys' first conference was back in the 80s and 90s, and someone said that their first conference was back in '98, and I was born in '99. So just thank just thank you guys though for just trying just building up this conference. I'm sorry, a conference / like just like building up the organization, because it has truly been a blessing to many people's lives and so on and so on. So I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Excellent, Jeremiah. Thank you very much. And so my first conference, along with Annie Bradbury and others, was 1986.
See, that's
my first
wow, yeah.
It's crazy, I know. Any other questions or thoughts before we start to wrap up? Thanks, Tom Lovett. Guys, never get on a cruise boat and dance with Tom Lovett. He will kill your knees, okay? He will kill your knees. This has been awesome. Any final thoughts or comments, questions?
Well, I would just like to say what a great job you guys did, and thank you so much for offering this, and how wonderful it was to hear from, the giants of this organization and what you shared and what you've done. It really is amazing. So thank you. You've just shared so much, and as Jeremiah said, you've set the stage for so many of us that came after you. So thank you. Thank you.
So excellent. And then I want to say one last thing before, if I don't say this, Paula Campbell Schwab will kill me. Once again, this particular session was sponsored by the Older Adults Who Stutter. It's a group of 50 plus people who stutter and all of their allies as well. We have a Facebook page, so please find us and join us. And thank you all very, very much.